How Medieval Peasants Survived Plagues ***. You close your eyes and allow your mind to slip back in time. Not to a king's palace or a battlefield, but to the crooked lanes and muddy fields of a medieval villager world, both strangely familiar and utterly alien, shaped by the slow rhythms of the seasons and the ever-present threat of death. This is not the kind of history told in bold, heroic colors. No, the lives of medieval peasants, especially when survival itself was at stake, were painted in shades of brown and gray, filled with routines that were both ordinary and, by our modern standards, almost unimaginably difficult. Let yourself settle into the sounds and textures of that long-ago world. The year is 1348. You are standing in the village of Elmstead, somewhere in rural England. The great plague, what later generations will call the Black Death, has begun to creep its way across the land. Carried by fleas, by ships, by rumors, and dread, the countryside is not immune. The first news arrives in whispers. A neighboring village has lost half its people. At first it seems impossible, but soon the signs arrive in Elmstead to a child with a sudden fever. A laborer collapsed beside the hayrick, a woman coughing blood behind a shuttered door. Yet life must continue. The plow must be pushed, the cows must be milked, firewood must be gathered from the thinning copse at the village's edge. For most peasants, the struggle is not merely against disease, but against hunger, cold, and the endless grinding cycle of chores that keeps a family alive. In Elmstead, a small group of families have worked these same fields for generations. The houses are simple, built of timber and wattle, roofed with thatch thick enough to keep out most of the rain, but not always the wind. There are no real streets, just muddy tracks winding between cottages and gardens, the earth packed down by centuries of trudging feet. At the village center stands the church, stone and squat, its bell the one reliable marker of time and occasion. Imagine waking before dawn, the air in your cottage heavy with smoke and the sharp temps of livestock. Your family rises slowly, each person tugging on layers of homespun wool, hands red and chapped from yesterday's labor. There is no privacy. Your parents, siblings, and sometimes even cousins or grandparents share the same space. At the hearth, your mother stirs a pot of thin pottage, made with whatever scraps are left from last year's harvest. Food is always a concern, but especially so now, as rumors of famine follow closely behind stories of the plague. Outside, the fields are silvered with dew. A blackbird calls from the hedge, chickens scratch half-heartedly for bugs. You fetch water from the well always, a task that brings worry, because you never know what illness lurks in the bucket, or who last touched the rope. The chores never end, and neither does the low-level anxiety that something somewhere is about to go wrong. By midday, word spreads that another household has fallen ill. The priest makes the rounds, swinging his censer, reciting prayers in Latin. His face is pale and drawn. Some villagers mutter that the plague is a punishment for sin. Others are too tired to speculate, too busy with work. You hear, in passing, that the lord of the manor has barricaded himself in his solar, attended only by a handful of servants. For the rest, there is no escape. Yet survival is not just a matter of luck. Over generations, peasants have developed a set of routines, boring, repetitive, but oddly comforting in their predictability. Households keep their own stores of dried beans and salted meat, rotating their larders as best they can. Windows are shuttered, not only against the wind but also to keep out bad air, which many believe carries disease. Herbs hang from the rafters: rosemary, sage, garlic. Some are used in food, others in crude medicines, a few burnt to fumigate rooms when sickness is near. The rhythms of daily life continue with little change, even as anxiety grows. Children tend geese in the marshy commons. Women mend clothes and tend small vegetable patches. Men repair fences or barter at the local market for salt, tools, or news. No one trusts outsiders. The arrival of a traveling merchant or peddler is met with suspicion, and more than one stranger is turned away from the village boundary for fear of what he might carry. Night falls quickly, with little in the way of candles or oil. Most people go to bed soon after sunset. Sleep comes easily, more from exhaustion than comfort, but dreams are troubled. Sometimes you wake to the sound of the church bell tolling for another soul. Sometimes it is the simple hush of the countryside, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire and the distant howl of a dog. Still, in this environment, small gestures take on huge importance. Neighbors share what they can: a basket of eggs here, a handful of beans there. If someone falls ill, others pitch in, bringing broth or tending the animals. It is not charity, exactly, but a form of mutual survival. Those who hoard, who refuse to help, are quickly remembered and not kindly. The social fabric, though worn thin by fear and deprivation, somehow holds their ancient customs for dealing with death. The dead are laid out in their best clothes, prayers are said. A small procession winds its way to the churchyard. Even now, these rituals continue, though few are gathered to watch. The gravedigger works alone, his spade the only sound in the cold morning dot. Superstition is everywhere. Some villagers smear their doors with herbs or hang amulets to ward off evil. Others rely on the advice of the local wise woman, who dispenses pungent poultices and whispered charms. No one truly knows what works, but anything is worth a try. Even the priest, who insists on faith, is seen knotting a strip of wool around his wrist, just in case. As weeks go by, the true scale of the plague becomes clear. Whole households are lost, the fields are less tended. Weeds begin to creep along the fence lines. The sound of children's laughter fades. Yet, for those who remain, life must go on. The sheep must be sheared, the oats sown, the bread baked. The harvest will not wait for grief or fear. You may wonder, how did any survive such times? The answer lies partly in chance, who happened to avoid the sickness, who had a stronger constitution, who managed to find food. But it also lies in these invisible networks of care and habit, in the boring details, keeping the water clean, the food simple, the rooms ventilated when possible, the hands scrubbed with ash and water. Sometimes, families take desperate measures. If illness comes too close, they may wall themselves up in their cottages, emerging only to collect food or water left by neighbors. Some abandon their homes altogether, seeking safety in the woods or the next village over, though few find true sanctuary. Travel is dangerous not just because of the disease, but because hungry, desperate people often become suspicious or even violent toward strangers. There are moments of kindness and cruelty in equal measure. A mother may risk her life to nurse a neighbor's child. Another may refuse to share a crust of bread. Every decision feels heavy with consequence, yet is made with little information and less hope. For many, survival comes down to the same chores, following the same routines, refusing to give in to despair. The weeks stretch into months. The fields, once green and orderly, become patchy and neglected. The churchyard fills. Some say that a third of the village is gone. Others have lost count. The priest continues his rounds, but even he begins to avoid the sickest homes, fearing for his own life. The wise woman, once respected, is now whispered about as a possible cause of the misfortune, though no one dares confront her directly. And still, the routines persist. The sheep are shorn, the bread is baked, a new calf is born in the barn, and for a moment, hope flickers. Even now, there is laughter, soft, uncertain, but real, when a child chases a runaway chicken through the yard, or when two old men argue about the best way to sharpen a scythe. Life, though diminished, goes on. But what of those who could not keep up? What of the families who disappeared, whose cottages now stand empty, windows boarded, doors ajar? Who remembers their names, their daily routines, their silent struggles? How did those who remained carry on, surrounded by so much loss and uncertainty? And could anything truly prepare them for what was yet to come? You wake to the sound of coughing, not your own, but from the next cottage over. The fire in your hearth has long since gone out, and the air inside is damp, close, and cold. Ash clings to the pot where last night's broth once simmered. Outside, the rooster crows, but fewer animals respond these days. The village is quieter than usual. More doors stay shut. It has been 3 months since the first deaths in Elmstead. The plague has moved, not in a wave but in bursts, sudden outbreaks that die down, then flare again without warning. Entire families have vanished. The lord of the manor hasn't been seen in weeks. Some say he fled to his hunting lodge far away, in the forest. Others whisper that his servants turned on him after he barred the gates. But life among the peasants continues, albeit altered. The daily rhythms are still recognizable: wake, work, eat, rest, but they now carry a different weight. Men still walk the fields, though fewer than before, their numbers thinned not just by death but by fear. The soil still needs turning, but no one trusts their tools anymore. A shared scythe might carry disease. Even touching the same hoe that belonged to an ill neighbor causes concern. So tools are left out in the rain, waiting for the brave or the desperate. You are neither brave nor foolish. Like many, you've adopted certain new habits, small rituals passed from one family to the next, growing more elaborate as fear spreads. You avoid sharing drinking vessels. You burn dried rosemary and wormwood near the door. When you fetch water from the well, you wrap your hands in linen soaked with vinegar. You whisper a short prayer not to the saints, but to no one in particular. A habit more than belief. The village church still functions, though Father Oswin is now thinner and grayer than ever. His sermons, once long and winding, have become brief and fearful. He speaks less of salvation and more of penance. When people gather rare, now they murmur about sin, about divine judgment. Some believe that the end times are near, that this plague is the punishment foretold in Revelation. Others, more practical, blame travelers or miasmith, invisible, poisonous air said to linger over rotting bodies. The graveyard, once a quiet place of Sunday reflection, is now busy. Graves are dug hastily, often in mass. Shrouds are reused. Stones are not marked. The priest no longer accompanies every burial. Sometimes, the gravedigger must bury his own kin with no prayer at all. Among the cottages, signs of adaptation are everywhere. People have begun to isolate. Some families dig trenches between homes, filling them with ash and vinegar to keep the bad air out. Others hang wind chimes made of iron keys, bones, and bits of glass, supposedly to confuse spirits. Entire households barricade themselves inside for days, living on dried peas, barley, and dried turnips. Hunger gnaws at everyone, but for now, fear is stronger than appetite. The marketplace has changed too. Where once neighbors bartered freely, now exchanges happen at a distance. A woman will leave a bundle of eggs on a stone and step back. The man across from her counts out a measure of flour, places it down, and walks away. Only then does she step forward. No one speaks. Eye contact is rare. Suspicion hangs in the air like the morning fog. And yet there are surprising moments of resilience. The village's children, though fewer, still find ways to play. They chase dogs and skip stones at the river. They sing rhymes about the plague, twisted versions of older songs. One in particular lingers in your mind. Ring of roses, round we go, ashes fall, the cold wind blows. They don't fully understand, of course, but in their laughter, there is defiance, a reminder that life, even in the shadow of death, can be stubbornly persistent. Meanwhile, the old ways are reevaluated. Herbal knowledge, long dismissed as women's superstition, suddenly gains new value. The village-wise woman Agnes is no longer merely tolerated but sought out. Her salves and teas, made from garlic, feverfew, and yarrow, become a first defense against symptoms. Whether they work or not is uncertain, but belief is a powerful bomb. She teaches others to make their own tonics, vinegar infused with lavender, ointments of sage and lard. She shows them how to hang dried orange peels in doorways, to line the floors with juniper branches. Her presence is calming, even when her hands tremble from exhaustion. Agnes, like others, has noticed something strange. Not all fall ill. Some families survive untouched, even in the heart of the village. They are not richer, not cleaner, not holier than the rest. But for reasons unknown, they endure. People begin to imitate their routines. They copy their diets, their sleeping arrangements, even their prayers. Maybe, they think, the answer is hidden in the smallest details. Diet becomes a central focus. With fresh produce scarce and meat rarer still, villagers turn to grulots, barley and lentils. Bread is baked with whatever flour is available, often mixed with beans or chestnuts to stretch the supply. Ale, weak and sour, is still drunk daily, not just for pleasure, but because it is often safer than water. Occasionally, someone finds a forgotten apple tree or traps a rabbit in the woods. These become community events, small feasts of sorts, celebrated with quiet gratitude. On the evenings, with daylight fading, people return to storytelling. Tales passed down through generations are retold by firelight. Stories of saints, of monsters in the forest, of long-lost kings and clever peasants. They are not told to distract, but to remember, to bind the listeners together with shared memory. And still, the plague lingers. There are days when it seems to recede. No new deaths for a week. Children run more freely. The market grows louder, but then, without warning, it returns. Another cough, another boarded cottage, another prayer murmured in the cold dark. Through it all, what's most remarkable is not the despair but the adaptation. The villagers do not understand contagion as modern science will one day define it, but their actions echo what epidemiologists would later recommend. Isolation, sanitation, reducing exposure. They develop these strategies not from theory, but from observation, from desperate experimentation, from the simple desire to stay alive. You begin to notice patterns. The homes that keep their windows open, letting in fresh air, fare slightly better. Those who avoid crowded gatherings seem to last longer. The families that dry their food well, that bury their waste away from water sources, that boil their linens when someone sneezes, all seem to endure. But what of faith? For many, belief becomes both shield and burden. Some cling to religious rituals with renewed fervor, lighting candles, fasting, confessing daily. Others question everything. Why do the devout die just as quickly? Why does the plague strike the innocent? A quiet rebellion begins to stir, not in words or violence, but in doubt. Some stop attending church. Some whisper that perhaps the saints have abandoned them. A few recall older gods, pagan echoes hidden beneath centuries of Christianity. A stone in the forest, once the site of ancient offerings, bears fresh herbs one morning. No one speaks of it, but they all noticed on in time. A strange normalcy sets in. The plague is no longer a shock, but a condition of life. The same way winter comes with hunger and spring brings flooding, the plague becomes another season, a season of death, but a season nonetheless. One to be survived. As the children grow quieter, the adults grow leaner. The air always smells of smoke and garlic, and yet, fields are still plowed, bread still rises, babies are still born. Then, one day, word reaches Elmstead from a Trevelius. People still wander, against all sense that the great cities are emptying. London is said to be half dead. Some say the Pope hides behind walls of flame and vinegar. Others claim that entire countries are gone. You don't know what to believe, but it makes you wonder if cities with their doctors and scholars and cathedrals have fared no better than your small muddy village. Then what does that say about power, about knowledge, about survival? Could it be that in this moment, it is not the learned or the noble who endure but the careful, the observant, the ones who adapt without needing to understand? And if so, what happens when the plague finally ends? What world will be left behind for those who survive? The last frost came early that year. You wake to a hush, not of fear this time, but of stillness. The coughing that once echoed through the thatched walls is gone. No funeral bells ring from the chapel. For the first time in months, there are no new graves being dug, no torchlit processions to the churchyard. That something has changed. There are still empty houses, dozens of them. Some stand with doors swinging open, chickens roosting inside, ivy creeping up their stonework. Others remain sealed, barricaded by desperate hands long since stilled. You walk past them without counting. You've stopped trying to remember who once lived where. But those who remain, those like you, begin to come out. Slowly, tentatively, the village stirs. Children peer from behind their mothers' skirts. Old men lean on staffs, blinking. Into the weak sunlight, a dog barks, startling everyone. Then someone laughs. The sound is strange now, too light, too sudden, but it is welcome. The plague hasn't vanished, it simply withdrew. Like a storm that passed over, unpredictable in its path and intensity. No one knows why. Some say it burned itself out. Others believe a saint interceded. A few whisper that it merely sleeps, waiting to return. But for now, there is breathing room. Survival, however, has not come without cost. Across Europe, historians will one day estimate that between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population has died. In cities, the dead were so numerous that burial became an act of logistics rather than mourning. In some towns, carts filled with bodies moved through the streets daily, accompanied by the call, "Bring out your dead." But in the countryside, in villages like yours, death was more personal. Every loss had a name. Every absence was a wound. In Elmstead, once home to perhaps 300 souls, only 120 remain. Of the manor household, only the steward survives. The Lord himself died far from here, trying to reach a monastery where he believed the walls would keep the pestilence out. They did not. With the manor lord gone and no heir present, questions arise. Who now owns the land? It's a question that would have been unthinkable a year ago. In feudal England, power was inherited, structured, and absolute. Peasants owed service, rent, and obedience to their lords. Their role was fixed by birth. And yet now, something stirs beneath that rigid order. Something unprecedented. There are too few workers to tend all the fields, too few herdsmen to guard the flocks, too few hands to grind grain, bake bread, mend tools. Labor, once abundant and expendable, has become precious, and that gives the survivors leverage. At first, the steward tries to enforce the old rules. Rents are to be paid, days of service fulfilled, but when no one comes to the manor to plow the domain land, he is forced to reconsider. Eventually, he offers payment in coin, not just grain, for anyone willing to work the Lord's fields. And this is where the transformation begins. For the first time, peasants begin to negotiate. If not here, they say, then elsewhere. They've heard that other villages, some nearly empty, offer better wages, more freedom. Landlords compete for workers. Some even promise freedom from serfdom entirely. Mobility, once nearly impossible, becomes a real option. Laborers walk for days to find better terms. Entire families relocate. The village loses some of its old kin lines but gains new faces. Survivors from elsewhere. Drawn by rumors of land and opportunity, the ancient social order starts to crack. This isn't revolution in the modern sense, no banners, no declarations, but it is subversive in its quiet persistence. Laws are passed to try and stop it. In 1351, Parliament will enact the Statute of Labourers, declaring that no worker may demand more wages than they earned before the plague. It also attempts to freeze people in place, forbidding them from moving to seek better conditions. But these laws, like so many things in this strange new world, prove difficult to enforce. How can you fine a peasant who has no coin? How do you imprison someone when the jails are empty and the guards dead? Some lords use violence, others try persuasion. A few adapt, reluctantly. Back in Elmstead, your own life begins to improve in subtle ways. The steward allows you to keep more of your grain. You plant a larger garden. You barter with the carpenter for a better roof. When winter comes again, your home is warmer than it has ever been. The church changes to Father Oswin, once stern and distant, becomes humbler. His sermons speak less of wrath and more of healing. He admits he does not know why the plague spared some and not others. He no longer claims to understand God's plan. This honesty makes his words more comforting. Somehow, with fewer mouths to feed, food becomes slightly more abundant for the first time in years. You taste meat, not just on holy days. You even buy a second blanket woven wool dyed blue, a luxury that would have been impossible before, and yet, with survival comes memory. There are dreams now, vivid and strange. You wake from them sweating, heart-pounding, images of shuttered windows and pale faces still sharp behind your eyes. Others speak of the same. Some avoid the churchyard entirely. The bells, when they ring, feel heavier. The past clings like soot, quiet, stubborn. Time moves on. Seasons change. A child is born, the first in over a year. You help with the delivery. She is named Alina, after her grandmother who did not survive. The entire village comes to see her. Her cries are strong, her eyes bright. The fields around the village begin to transform. Where once strips were farmed communally under rigid rules, some peasants now claim whole parcels to themselves. Fallow land is taken up by those with the strength and seed to plant. Enclosure, the fencing of previously open fields, begins, not as policy but as necessity. Over time, this new order will become formalized. The Middle Ages will not end in fire or conquest but will erode, like a stone path worn by countless quiet steps. Feudalism, that great unyielding structure, will bend. Towns will rise. Guilds will form. Serfs will become free tenants. Wages will grow. And the seeds of capitalism will be sown not by lords or kings but by ordinary survivors. By the quiet resilience of the forgotten. You will grow old. Your hands, once blistered by crude tools, will grow calloused and strong. You will tell your children of the year when the world seemed to stop. They will ask what the plague looked like. You will say, "It was not what I saw, but what I didn't." The silence, the absence, and long after you are gone, historians will study your time. They will count the dead. They will debate causes. They will argue about masks and quarantines and population shifts. But they may never fully grasp what it meant to survive, not in terms of health, but in the quiet, persistent continuation of life. The plague did not end the world. It simply changed it forever. And as you sit by the fire, bread baking, smoke curling into the thatch above, you realize you are part of that change. Not because you led armies or wrote books, but because you endured, you observed, you adapted, you survived, and in doing so you reshaped history.